यहाँ दिख रहा भाई कितना मज़ा आ रहा है। ठंडी हवा, सामने सूरज, कितना पब्लिक, इंटरेस्टिंग, काफ़ी मज़ा आ रहा होता है, अच्छा लग रहा हो।
Hi everyone, my name is Kiu-wai and I work for the Asian Film Archive and like to welcome everyone again to the second episode of Coming Attractions with the Asian Film Archive, and I'm very happy today to have with us our guest curator for our ongoing program right now, the Inhospitable World, Kiu-wai Chu with us from NTU, and then we're just gonna briefly talk about a bit of the program, what inspires him to come up with this research topic, as well as the film program, and maybe a bit of the symposium that just went on. So, firstly, I think I would like to introduce Kiu-wai, and just to ask Kiu-wai a bit to share like a bit of your background and what you're doing in Singapore, because I know you came from Hong Kong like last year.
Actually, not exactly from Hong Kong, because I've been working in several places before coming to Singapore. Well, but basically, I guess it's quite common for academics these days, particularly junior academics, where we have to switch from jobs to jobs and then from country to country as well. But it's a nice experience. So I started off as kind of like a film buff, watching a lot of films, and then entered into film studies, and for some reason I got my PhD from Hong Kong University, and then afterwards I did postdocs in Zurich and Sydney in Australia, and then slightly more than a year ago I came to Singapore for my this new position in NTU in environmental humanities and Chinese studies. Although I'm still teaching films.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what you actually teach and also a bit of your research interests.
Right.
Yeah.
So generally, I teach on eco-cinema, and particularly in Asian context and Chinese context as well, from China to Hong Kong and Taiwan, etc. The Sinophone world. And but then, my own research interest is more in environmental issues and also animal studies, in particularly in films and visual arts in Asia. So I guess I can say a little bit about my PhD thesis, which is I'm not going to go into the details.
Sure, of course.
But then I did my project in Sanshui, which is like Chinese landscapes in the Anthropocene, and which is kind of a study of how the traditional Sanshui aesthetics can be seen in contemporary Chinese films and visual arts. So how the filmmakers and artists are actually reappropriating these kind of classical aesthetics in their contemporary works in order to address some more present environmental problems that we see today.
Maybe just a bit of your own like personal motivations, just to ask you why you are so invested and interested in studying the Anthropocene and of course the visual culture that's surrounding it. Like really what made you go down this path, I guess?
I think, as I mentioned, I think I basically just started off as a film buff, watching a lot of films that are about, particularly I'm hugely inspired by Jia Zhangke and the sixth generation's Chinese filmmakers. And in their films, I think we all can see a common characteristics where they are addressing a lot of the problems that we see between the how humans are situating themselves in increasingly deteriorating environment, and urban ruins, derelict buildings being their everyday life environment, and all these I think have been intriguing me to actually focus on how how the relationship between humans and environment are being represented in films. Because in the past, I think even for like my time when I was a film studies student, we've been introduced to a lot of theories and also films that are focusing on gender issues, race, etc. But I think in the past 10 years or so, we are seeing more and more interest in exploring the relationship between human and nature and human and the urban environment. So I think that's how I started off focusing in this area of study.
I think I wanted to also go a bit into like some of this like maybe subgenres, and I also know that you maybe have published a bit on them, like things like cli-fi or like eco-disaster. I mean,
Right.
just to maybe explain to an audience that might not be so familiar with these terms, but may have, of course, came across these types of like films or
Yeah.
cinema,
Yeah.
like just to also unpack this whole eco-cinema a bit for us. Yeah.
Yeah, I see eco cinema as something which is actually very broad. But then, as you mentioned, I think some of the more commonly seen genres like cli-fi, which is climate fiction, a deviation from sci-fi, or a more specific kind of sci-fi which deals with climate change, and as some examples like The Day After Tomorrow and 2012, or even Snowpiercer. All these Hollywood films are actually good examples of what a cli-fi is. But then I think there are also various kinds of films which we can categorize as eco-cinema, and basically all kinds of genres can be seen as eco-cinema, like documentaries. We are seeing films like An Inconvenient Truth and all these, which are also very popular, and The Cove, etc. And then increasingly, we are also seeing a lot of art house films that very slow in pace, and also I think quite a lot of us who are interested in art films would know doesn't necessarily address environmental issues, but then we see how the environment is being represented in the film in a specific way in order to help us rethink our relationship with the natural world. So I think all these different genres of films are increasingly getting their attention, and definitely we're going to learn a lot about the environment from them as well.
I think just talking about some of the examples that you shared, and maybe our positionalities, like of course you are interested in the Sinophone and the larger Asian cinema, and of course like we are also Asian Film Archive. So some of the examples that you shared are of course like the more popular maybe Hollywood examples. So my next question is maybe about whether you think that there is anything quite specific or quite special about the treatment when these themes are being brought into like the larger Asian region. Like do you see any like maybe interesting trends or something that's quite different from our Western counterparts, for instance?
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I guess increasingly we are seeing whether it's Western films or Asian films, they are actually trying to highlight the point that people in the non-Western world, or people that are in the less developed countries. I'm not saying that all Asian countries are less developed, but no, obviously that's not what I'm trying to say. But then there are a lot of environmental injustice that we see in the non-Western or particularly what we call the global South, which some parts of Asia is also part of, and that's also why I think there are a lot of issues that Asian films are able to address, which are kind of still being neglected in the Western cinema, which I think are reflected in some of the films I selected for the program, The Inhospitable World. And then, so yeah, we see a lot of people, and also what we humans and the more than human world. When I say more than human world, so I'm referring to like animals, plants, or even any kind of microorganisms and the non-living beings. All these kind of living and non-living matters are actually getting more attention and being put on screen, so that we actually see that a lot of these human and non-human subjects are actually marginalized and also being exploited in many ways, particularly in a time where we are experiencing a lot of environmental problems and disasters. So I think a lot of these Asian films that we've selected are actually reflecting that. And at the same time, I think in some of these Western documentaries, like, for example, Louis Sihoyo's The Cove, which talks about how dolphin hunting. It's a thing in the Japanese fishing village, and it kind of demonizes the village for this 400-year tradition.
Yep.
And I think instead of showing a one-sided story, I'm not saying that what they do is justifiable in all senses.
Yep.
But then there are always two sides of a story, and I think Asian films or an Asian voice in such a conversation is necessary. Yeah.
I think this like nicely leads us to the program that we are doing right now, which is of course under the Asian Film Archive's like Reframe series. So of course you have chosen the title, The Inhospitable World. I think maybe we can start off by talking about the title first, before we talk about some of the films that you have shared with us. So like, where do you get the inspiration of the title from? Maybe that's a starting point.
Right. I guess, well, very literally, I think our world is getting more and more inhospitable in many senses.
Yep. I mean, it's like we are distancing right now. I mean, this is like clearly
exactly right.
a visual representation of that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I thought we should have been wearing masks as well, but
I think
because of the distance.
Distanced enough.
So okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah, but then we all experience this kind of inhospitability, and at the same time, I think it's not just affecting human beings, but also animals and the environment. So it's inhospitable in many senses because ecocritic or ecologically, it's inhospitable for all livings, for climate reasons of like climate change, global warming, and also other kinds of environmental pollutions that are caused by human beings. But at the same time, I think the pandemic, obviously that's something that it's huge in since the beginning of the year, and I think that is also one reason why we are saying that the world is becoming more and more inhospitable. And another thing is the title is actually taken from a book by an American professor, in film studies, Jennifer Fay, Inhospitable World, Cinema in the Anthropocene, in the time of Anthropocene.
Who also joined us for the symposium.
Which, who also joined us in the symposium and gave a wonderful talk. But being inspired by her book, because she actually discussed a lot of very interesting examples of American classical genres, like slapstick comedies by Buster Keaton, and also the film noir from the 1940s. So she actually talked quite a bit about how these American films are reflecting the kind of inhospitability in our world. And I think for what I'm hoping to do with this program is to actually introduce more Asian voices as well to the conversation, and to show the stories of the inhospitable stories from our part of the world as well.
Yeah, I think that's what we set out to do from the beginning.
Yeah.
I remember like we had our first conversation maybe like very early this year when things were still a bit different, obviously. And then I think along the way we had to change a bit based on like we had to respond to what's happening around the world, the pandemic, obviously. And how do you think that maybe shaped the program a bit as discussions went along while the world kept changing?
Yeah, it certainly isn't it's a tough thing for us, right? But then I think there are also some goods in the process, which I see. So we originally planned this for April, and then now we postponed it to October and November, and it actually offered me some time to catch and rewatch a lot of these films during the summer break here. So I got to actually find some good films that recently released as well. But then I think for that particular reason, because of the pandemic, I have also incorporated the element of the pandemic situation and try to include some Asian films that are about Asian pandemics, although there aren't actually many. But then we selected the Hong Kong pandemic film from the 1970s, Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow, and which is also quite a rare chance because it's only recently remastered, and I think it's a Singapore premiere, right? So yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, talking about like the films that we've chosen, I think this is a good time that we maybe try to recommend to our audience like some of the maybe your personal favorites. So I'm sure like the Hong Kong film may be one of them.
Yeah, it is. I think it is one of them. It's a rare chance to watch the film. Although I must say the film is actually seriously edited and censored back in the 70s, and that's why the present the present state of it is actually an incomplete film. But it's an interesting film because it's an adaptation of Albert Camus' The Plague. And it's directed by Long Kang, who is a very prominent filmmaker in Hong Kong back in the 70s, and also kind of reflects how people back then imagined a pandemic. Although it's some would see it in a more as a political metaphor, but then I think. If we see it as basically just a pandemic film, it also tells us a lot of, or actually reflected a lot of things that are seen during the SARS and also now. So it's kind of like foretelling the future in many ways. So that's definitely one film that I would recommend. And another one would be going way back in time to 1927. Chang, a drama of wilderness, will be another favorite of mine.
Same actually.
Okay, you saw it too.
I saw it.
Right?
Yes,
okay.
yes.
So you know what? So that is a film that is actually made by Marion Cooper and Ernest Schoensack, who also made King Kong in 1933, which became a very popular Hollywood classic now. And I think although the film itself, Chang basically means elephant in Thai, right? So the film is actually shot in Siam back in the 20s, and in the Thai forest, and it talks Thai jungle, and it talks about the story of a Thai peasant family who try to struggle against the forces of nature and dealing with all these different kinds of wild animals, and I think this is a pretty rare chance to see such a variety of wild animals and I don't think it's actually something that can be easily shot now in real because of the, I don't know, say like one of, I'm not sure this is a spoiler or what, but there's like a climax to the film where we see a huge herd of elephants trying to destroy the village. And
and it's like, I because I watched the film as well, I felt like there's almost no way that they could have faked it. It really looks like a lot of this, like what we would call like animal stunt shots. Even the animals sometimes were almost acting like the monkey or had a lot of expressions, and like there were like real tigers and like snakes as well, and of course the elephants, which, so this epic scene basically, right, that you were saying that this herd of elephants came down and crushed the whole village. Like that almost felt like in the 20s, that almost felt like there was no CGI or no VFX to this. This is like as real as it gets, almost. Although, of course, it's orchestrated, I'm sure. But the effort that went to it must be immense, I can imagine. So I think maybe by this time, the screenings are already over. I'm not too sure whether there's still a video on demand, but we have tried to put that online. So if there is still a chance to catch it, if not, please also like look up and just take a look at what is it about, because I think it's quite a key film and also the opening film for this whole series as
Yes,
well.
yes,
Yeah, it was
yeah.
the opening film.
And I'm definitely gonna give the monkeys best supporting awards if
Yeah,
they get.
yeah.
Yeah, they are really so expressive and such a joy to watch. I mean,
And it was also a silent film, so
yep, yeah.
yeah. So there were all these like dialogues that came in, which is like quite rare. I mean, of course, like we're maybe not used to seeing a silent film format now, where there's like no dialogue, a lot of
Yeah,
music,
all the
but
subtitles, right? Only.
because of how animated the animals are,
Right.
like I felt like it worked as well, very well, very entertaining. Yeah,
Almost like a cartoon.
yeah, almost like
Yeah.
a cartoon.
Yep, yep.
Is there any other titles that you would like to recommend?
Another I would definitely recommend would be Nothing to Be Afraid of, which is a new film by an Armenian female director who's a very young director as well, Silva Kaganosian, and it's actually about how it's shot in Armenia, so kind of a war zone, and according to some statistics here, so in 2018, there are over 73,000 mines that have been neutralized in that area. So the film itself is actually a documentary about 5 female deminers who working in the woodlands, where they have to demine these or clear up the landmines and on a daily basis. So it's their daily work, but they make it looks like as if it's something very usual and normal. But then we all know how dangerous and how much risk there is behind all these. So I think that's a very good film to show how the inhospitable world is actually affecting other parts of even say like West Asia. And we actually had an interview with Silva, the director, as well. She pointed out something that I haven't actually thought about. Say, and we asked her whether the pandemic is affecting their lives, and also how are people coping with it. She mentioned, in the beginning, people were quite afraid and all, but then now it's actually not really a thing to them, because there is a much more serious problem, because the war is back, and
Yep.
they basically are trying to avoid getting killed, and pandemic is not really something that is the biggest issue to them. So I think the levels of inhospitability is also something that we have to consider. And while we are feeling that our world is basically becoming really unbearable, and our life is getting unbearable, but at the same time, I think there are people elsewhere who are actually suffering even worse kind of inhospitability.
Yep. Maybe just a question on the overall curation this time. I mean, you selected maybe about 10 to 15 titles, including short films.
Yeah.
So really, like, how did you come up with this, like, this selection, basically, this like wide range and diverse types of like films, but they're all still under the banner of eco cinema? Like,
Right.
what informs you, basically? Yeah.
I must say I'm a very greedy person, and
Sure.
I always like to select a huge variety and range of stuff. So I hope the program can actually show the spectrum of films from Asia, or that are about Asia, from the 1920s to the present, and also from various parts of Asia. So I've tried to include films that are from East, Southeast, South, and also West Asia. And also, they all try to address different kinds of environmental issues. Some about the dynamics between humans and animals. Others about how wars and other kinds of environmental destructions are actually affecting people's daily lives. And also, there are also some more experimental films and short films that are basically about the non-human world and things like that. So I try to show how diversified Asian cinema can be, or Asian eco-cinema can be. So I hope people would actually not see eco-cinema as something very narrowly about conveying an environmentalist message and being didactic or overly preachy and things like that. So it comes in many different forms, I think.
I was just wondering, like, when you teach in school and with your students, like, how do you actually approach this eco-cinema subject? Like, I'm just wondering how you, what do you teach them? What do you show them? And like maybe from a more like academic or student to teacher level, like how does that maybe even differ from what you show with us, which is a more public audience as well?
Yeah, it's a challenge to the students in watching films that are beyond their general interests. Say, I guess most youngsters are still relatively keen in watching Hollywood films or animations. So I usually will start off with something more approachable, like The Day After Tomorrow, although it's an older film, but then some still see it as really pretty interesting and hilarious because it's so it's the extent of exaggeration in the film. But then I would also show like Hayao Miyazaki's animations, which have a very strong environmentalist message in many of his animated films. But then I would definitely also try to introduce them to like films that are shown in the hospitable world, something that are more art house, more contemplative, slow, like something we see in Chai Ming-liang's films, slow pace, long takes, and films without dialogues at all. So these will be challenging, but then as I teach them, there are various modes of eco-cinema. So some of them are more directly politically, they come with a political agenda and they try to promote an environmentalist message, while others are more art house and they are trying harder to actually change or cultivate our a more alternative perception towards films. So through watching films, I hope that they can actually try to adopt a kind of non-human-centered, or what we call a more non-anthropocentric or an even more ecocentric kind of perspective towards the films that they watch.
I think just to go a bit about the symposium that we had. So I mean, just maybe just to talk about how you thought about the guests as well as how you structured the online symposium. So of course, like every reframe edition that Asian Film Archive does, we always wanted a discursive element to it. But and of course, most of them are live. But this time round, the challenge was, of course, to make it an online event as well. But that also, of course, frees up the availability of like international guests. We could get more like voices in from all over the world. So just wondering about how you structured it and how you wanted to present knowledge based on those different panel sessions. What went through your mind when you came up with that?
I think first of all, I think this is actually in a way a blessing in disguise, because because of the pandemic, we had to actually switch to an online live stream mode, and that actually also led us to have a lot more viewers and attendees from all around the world. So people actually click into to watch it from different parts of the world. And another thing is, as I mentioned, I always like to try and have a wider spectrum of things and also participants in this symposium in this case. So I for the three panels I organized, they are actually made up of different people, from film scholars, professors who gave papers on more theoretical talks and topics, to filmmakers who actually were able to share how they make these films, and also how they cope with the pandemic situation, and also to film festival organizers who also shared their experience in how the pandemic has actually switched some of these film festivals to an online mode, and how that worked. So I guess I hope that this is actually a more dynamic and a more diversified kind of symposium, rather than a strictly academic symposium, which can actually which actually drew people from various disciplines to had this kinds of dialogues. And I think it worked very well.
And I think like from our end, we will also try to make the symposium, the recording of the symposium, public. I mean, we will let our public know through our socials as well, whether when that will be published. But hopefully that content and all the discussions that went on could be, because it's an online recording, so it has a perpetuity to it that hopefully a lot more people can go back to and reference maybe next time, because there were quite a few quite eminent scholars, as well as like interesting, as you said, filmmakers that were part of the program that also spoke about their experiences, and I thought that was a very wonderful experience that we created. I was just thinking, since we are on the topic of like film organizing and all that, like, that's just to flip the table a bit. Do you have any questions for me, like about
Okay. Well, not exactly related to what we've talked about, but are you also having any ideas for what kinds of issues or topics that Reframe will actually cover in the coming future?
So we are planning a few more things. So, I mean, as you know, like what we've done so far over the last few years with this series is to really invite different specialists, or even academics, or people that have like put time and effort into research topics, and then for them to actually have the chance to present it to a public audience through, of course, films. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like there's always been an opportunity that's a bit lacking, especially with academics, to really bridge the gap between your studies and, of course, the audience. Because as we know, like, you know, everyone writes like dissertations and theses, but not a lot of people actually reads them, or the public. So I thought like maybe creating an environment, a discursive environment like that was great for people, specialists, to bridge that gap with a wider audience. So I think there were some ideas that I still can't share, because we still wanted to, I mean, hopefully tease people into finding out more. But I think issues of I think translation is one thing, like linguistics and translation is definitely one thing that was spoken about. And also we are in talks with someone from India at the moment. So a guest curator who probably will bring in some experimental type of cinema, but also interested in the transnational migration relationships between Singapore and as you said, the global south, or the like India or Bangladeshi, and that kind of like labor relationships. So I think those are a few topics that we might go into. But of course, as you know, the world is getting more inhospitable, so we're also not sure, like when things can really resume, or whether we can continue our cinema program. So I think as we are having the screenings right now for the rest of 2020, especially with your program, it will be really nice if people take the time to come back to the big screen in a safe environment, of course, because we can't take these things for granted, I guess.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, these are some of the few plans that AFA has. And yeah, do you have any last things that you want to talk to
Yeah,
our audience about, or like
right.
yeah,
Well, one thing, since
Yeah.
you came back to the inhospitable world
Yeah.
the theme, one thing I would like to add is that I'm actually not hoping to say we are like completely hopeless, and that's the reason why the in the inhospitable world is actually bracketed.
Yep.
So I'm hoping to suggest that there is well, even when everything seems to be going wrong,
Yeah.
there is always still hope, and if we try to
Yeah.
find a way to fix the
Yeah.
problems.
I think, like, for instance, like having this long table between us, like we can still have a discussion, but we can always make
Yeah.
things work, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think with that, I think it's quite a nice closing. So like again, like to thank Kiu-wai for
Yeah,
being here
thanks,
with us,
Kiu-wai.
and also for hopefully for everyone to tune in to Asian Film Archive's like upcoming programs in social media, and of course Singapore Community Radio as well for giving us this platform, and stay tuned to both platforms. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.